Good afternoon, everyone. We have still got people joining. I'm Selene Saxby. I'm the MP for North Devon. I'm Anthony Brown's stand-in. Apologies for things being slightly late this afternoon. That's mostly due to my own technical incompetence. The Minister is already with us and raring to go. So I'm just going to keep an eye. I think we're almost all in now, and hand over to this afternoon. Let me try an introduction. This is the Environment APPG, to check you're all in the right place. And we're very fortunate to have Minister Callanan with us this afternoon to give us a briefing on the heat and buildings strategy. So if I can hand over to Lord Callanan, please. You're on mute, Minister.
My apologies, perils of Zoom calls. Well, thank you very much indeed, Selene, and thank you very much to the Environment APPG for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm delighted to be here to discuss the recently published heat and building strategy at this pivotal time as we build back better, greener and faster from the pandemic. So the heat and building strategy builds on the Prime Minister's 10-point plan and the Energy White Paper by seeking to provide clear signals for industry and consumers about how we reduce emissions from buildings, the package of policies that will underpin it, and our longer-term plan to utilise research and innovation to underpin future strategic decisions to deliver mass transformation by 2050. So the package of measures announced will significantly reduce the UK's dependency on fossil fuels and exposure to global price spikes, while supporting up to 250,000 green jobs across the UK by 2035 and delivering something like 6 billion of additional GVA by 2030. But as you are aware, meeting our net zero target will require virtually all buildings to be decarbonised and heat in industry to be reduced to fairly close to zero. Now, given the diversity of heat demand, a mix of technologies and customer options will need to be available to decarbonise heat at scale. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So government, as well as industry, has an important role to play to help deliver the transition to net zero. And we're taking steps to accelerate the decarbonisation of our heating and cooling systems in a number of ways, including firstly setting an ambition to phase out the installation of new and replacement natural gas boilers by 2035, once costs have come down and following the natural replacement cycles. Secondly, making heat pumps as cheap to buy and run as a gas boiler by growing the heat pump market to support 600,000 installations per year by 2028 and expanding UK manufacturing with the ambition of working with industry to reduce costs by at least 25 to 50% by 2025 and hopefully to parity with gas boilers by 2030. We're introducing a new new boiler upgrade scheme by April 2022, giving consumers £5,000 grants for those who want to make the switch to low carbon heat early. And we're continuing to grow and decarbonise the UK heat network market through the 338 million heat network transformation programme, which includes 270 million towards a green heat network fund. We know, of course, that hydrogen may well be a viable option later this decade, so the government is also supporting industry to undertake large-scale trials of hydrogen for heating, with a view to taking decisions on its role and its feasibility in decarbonising heating by around 2026. On home insulation, the strategy sets out what is our fabric-first approach to improving the energy efficiency of our homes and our businesses. This will reduce the amount of energy that we waste, it will lower bills, and it will make our homes, our workplaces, and our public spaces more comfortable and healthier. So we've already committed over £1 billion to improving the efficiency of fuel-poor and other low-income groups through the Local Authority Delivery Scheme and the Home Upgrade Grant. For social housing, £61 million was awarded for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Demonstrator to test out innovative approaches to retrofitting at scale. And we've also now launched Wave 1 of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund earlier this year, which is providing up to £160 million worth of funding to continue the retrofitting of social housing across England. I'm delighted to say that as part of the latest spending review, we've just committed an additional £950 million to improve the efficiency of fuel-poor homes through the Home Upgrade Grant, an additional 800 million to the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and we're also investing 1.425 billion over 2022-23 to 24-25 in the next round of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, with the aim of reducing emissions from public sector buildings by 75% by 2037. So that takes our total funding to over 6.6 billion rather, over the lifetime of this Parliament. In addition to that, we want to give clear market signals on increasing the energy efficiency of our homes. So we plan to consult on phasing in higher minimum performance standards to ensure that all homes meet APPG levels where cost-effective, practical and affordable by 2035. For new buildings, we're going to introduce regulations from 2025 through the Future Home Standard to ensure that all new homes in England are ready for net zero by already having a high standard of energy efficiency and low carbon heating installed. Through all of this change, of course, we do need to engage with residents and tenants for the work of groups such as the Social Housing Tenants Jury, which has been gathering views on how landlords and tenants can collaborate to tackle climate change, is particularly vital. On building the supply chain and skills through our net zero strategy and heat and building strategy, we're committed, of course, to growing green industries and supply chains in the UK to help us deliver on the transition to net zero. So in July this year, the Green Jobs Task Force published an independent report which outlined 15 recommendations across 3 different themes, driving investment in net zero to support good quality green jobs in the UK. Building pathways into good green careers, supporting the transition for workers in a high carbon economy. The Green Jobs Task Force report, alongside our ambitious skills programme, will be invaluable to us as we build a pathway into green careers for people from all backgrounds and ensuring that workers and communities depending on the high carbon economy are supported as we transition to a greener future. All the schemes in the heat building strategy, including the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, the Public Sector Decarbonisation Strategy and the Local Authority Delivery Schemes, rely, of course, on the same supply chains, and as such, we're taking a coordinated approach to mitigating capacity issues. My department is currently working closely with Trustmark, with the MCS, with the PAS certification organisations to ensure that the supply chain is ready to support and can benefit from all of these schemes. My officials and those in the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities will continue to work with industry to understand the supply chain issues across the home retrofit energy efficiency measures, including changes in material costs and the supply of labour at both the national and the regional level. This will allow us to continue to support installers on the ground, as well as developing any further policies in future government energy efficiency schemes. We also, of course, know that local actors can play a crucial role in decarbonising their local area, and BEIS, along with our colleagues in DLUC and other departments, will continue to work with stakeholders to better understand how we can make the most of local opportunities. So alongside local engagement, consumer engagement, of course, as well, is a vital element to successful decarbonisation, as the public will need to take action to change the way that they heat their homes and their workplaces. This will require extensive cooperation and collaboration, both from government, from industry, and from consumers. We therefore need to make sure that consumers have the right information, that they're empowered to make the right low carbon choices, and are supported by the right enabling environment to help them to reduce their emissions. So the heat and building strategy is the first stepping stone to improving public understanding of the heat decarbonisation challenge and how our heating contributes towards climate change. It sets out key projects and activities that the government is undertaking to support the mass transformation of our buildings and steps that individuals can take to begin decarbonising how they treat their homes and their workplaces. The strategy weaves together all of our policies, highlighting the interactions and the impacts between different decisions and actions. Within the strategy, the government has set out its plans to ensure low carbon systems are cost effective for all, whilst prioritising support for vulnerable people through schemes such as the Home Upgrade Grant. As you will know, the Net Zero strategy was published alongside the heating and building strategy, setting out a vision for transitioning the wider economy to net zero. This strategy raises ambition across a breadth of sectors as we set out on our path to meet both our interim carbon budgets and our net zero targets by 2050. Both strategies build on the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, making the most of new growth and employment opportunities across the country and continue the UK's strong track record in decarbonising, whilst at the same time successfully growing our economy. Thank you for listening and very happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I've got questions flooding in, so please do pop them in the chat. Hopefully they're not so long, and if you do need to speak, raise your hand, but the chat's where we're starting. So I've got a question first coming to you, Baroness Young, and who asks, in light of the start-stop history of net zero homes policies in the past, how will the government give confidence to the suppliers and fitters market now?
I think that is a crucial point. So some of our schemes in the past have been a bit start-stop, but I'm delighted to say that for the current spending round, we have the policies that we put in place to do the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Public Sector Decarbonisation Strategy, Home Upgrade Grant, Boiler Upgrade Scheme, etc., all of which will be in place for at least the spending review, which is for 3 years. And obviously, we're hoping to build on them in future rounds after that. But it's an important point that we need to have consistency to give installers and others the opportunity to build the capacity that we will need.
Thank you, Minister. I've been told that this is a much friendlier APPG than many, and therefore you're allowed to ask your own questions. So apologies, Baroness Young. I don't know if you had a supplementary or if you were happy with that. And I'm going to come to David Cowdery.
I was going to just say 3 years is not very long time to establish confidence.
No, but it is the period of the existing spending review, and obviously I'm optimistic that the schemes prove to be a success. We'll be able to continue them on into the future, but of course it does depend on the ability of finance and future spending reviews.
Thank you. So coming to David Cowdery from the MCS Foundation. David, there he is. I can see him. Did you want to ask your question?
I'll try. I'm at COP, so it's very noisy, so do forgive me. Martin, to help reduce the cost of heat pumps, would you support zero rating VAT?
I can't hear you very well, Geoffrey.
So David's question is, help reduce the cost of heat pumps, would you support zero rating VAT on all domestic renewables and energy efficiency measures for a limited period of 10 years?
Of course, I can't commit to any tax changes. That's for the Chancellor, but I think we do have some generous support in place for heat pumps. So of course we need to do two things. We need to help to grow the market using the boiler upgrade scheme, and we also need to eventually more closely equalise prices of gas and electricity, because currently, of course, the high price of electricity relative to gas, even with the current spike in gas prices, disincentivises electrification of heat. So in the longer term, we will need to do something about rebalancing the price mechanism as well. But future tax changes obviously are for the Chancellor.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Joe Tetlow from the Environment APPG, who's not a COP.
I'm going up tomorrow, Selene. Thank you very much, and cheers, Martin, for being on this call. It's great to have you here to talk about the heating building strategy. My question is just basically about metro mayors. We had a lot of talk before the heating building strategy about their role in delivering local home decarbonisation. What role do you see them playing from Greater Manchester to the West Midlands in helping to develop the retrofitting skills needed, and also to lower costs and to help decarbonise homes? What role do you see them playing, and does the heating building strategy go far enough in helping metro mayors and local authorities to decarbonise our homes?
Indeed, they have an important role. In fact, not just metro mayors, but all local authorities, and they are the delivery vehicle for a number of the policies that are outlined. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, the Sustainable Warmth Competition, the boiler upgrade grants, etc. A lot of them are all channeled through local authorities. In fact, I was in Manchester only a few weeks ago visiting some of the schemes being implemented by Manchester local government. I'm a strong believer in local government. I used to be a councillor myself, and local government are best placed to decide strategies in their own local area. They have an increasing role in schemes like eco and identifying households that could benefit from that, the local authority flex element, and a number of our other schemes, as I mentioned, are channeled through local authorities. So yes, local government has a critical role to play.
Thank you. And so coming to Mayor Garland next. Mayor, I don't know if you want to ask your question, who's from Kingfisher PLC.
Yes, sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Lord Callanan, for your presentation as well. So I'm from Kingfisher, we're the parent company of B&Q and Screwfix in the UK. So my question is around the owner-occupied market, and the heat and building strategy does identify it's the biggest proportion of UK housing with the lowest EPC on average, but yet the government funding provided within the strategy is very limited to this part of the market, other than of course the heat pump scheme. So curious about what other schemes there could be in future for this part of the market, and in particular whether you see there being a successor scheme to the Green Homes Grant.
Well, there are a number of schemes that are targeted towards the owner-occupier section of the market. The home upgrade grant, for instance, the local authority delivery scheme, all of those that can be accessed by people living in owner-occupied houses, but on lower incomes, usually under £30,000 a year. Also, the eco scheme, £1 million a year, can be accessed by those in the owner-occupying sectors. But there's no question, of course, that it is a challenging area. We will need to look at regulation in this sector, but politically, obviously, that's quite challenging. But I'm sure there'll be lots of new customers for Kingfisher with your insulation products in the years to come.
Thank you, Minister. And coming next to Simon Harpin from BEMA.
Thanks for joining us, Minister. Yes, we're a Manufacturer Trade Association, BEMA. And so I heard from BEI's official earlier today that they're planning a much needed improvement to the government's Simple Energy Advice website, which I think is probably a bit underused and underfilled at the moment. But I think, would that be accompanied by a large kind of communications campaign targeted at householders to help them see what their home's zero carbon pathway could look like and allow them to plan in advance to help with the delivery of the strategy?
Yeah, no, I think that's quite a good point. It's certainly something we need to look at, how we can help to provide impartial, simple, straightforward advice to householders on what is quite a confusing area. Of course, there are sadly a few charlatans in the market who will provide misleading advice pointing towards their particular technical solution. So there's definitely a role for government, for the trade associations and others to play in helping to provide clear, impartial advice to householders on how they can proceed to decarbonise their buildings, how they can install insulation, how they can get low carbon heating systems, etc. And it's something that we'll be looking to ramp up communications on, particularly as we roll out the boiler upgrade scheme next year.
Thanks.
Thank you. And coming to Richard Lowes next, who is the Regulatory Assistance Project, I think, from the University of Exeter. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much. And good afternoon. Yes, so the Regulatory Assistance Project is a think tank working on policy and regulation, in case you don't know. I guess we were slightly surprised by the balance in terms of regulation compared to capital funding. So I'd say that the strategy is slightly more balanced towards regulatory measures like minimum energy performance standards and fossil fuel phase out dates, and slightly lower on this in terms of capital funding. So because this is quite novel and obviously a huge transition, I just wondered if you thought that represented a slight risk in terms of delivery.
Apologies, David. I don't know if it was my fault, but I didn't catch all of that question. It might be my connection. I wonder if you could repeat it, please. Sorry.
I can do, yeah. So sorry if it's my connection. The strategy is quite heavy on regulation. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear that, yeah.
So the strategy is quite heavy on regulation, but less heavy in terms of capital support. And that's quite novel in terms of an approach to driving a heat transition of this scale. So I just wondered if you thought that represented any sort of delivery risk, and if there was any sort of insurance backup if there does turn out to be some delivery failure?
If you're asking me, would I like to have more capital support available? Of course, but we've got to live within the spending constraints. I think, bearing in mind the constraints of the financial round, we've done well to get the support that we have, and there's still a substantial capital programme as I outlined, which will help to build up the supply chain. But yes, of course, we will have to look at regulatory options for a number of sectors, private rented sector, ultimately owner occupiers, commercial buildings, etc., to set people on the right path.
Thank you, Minister. I've got a question here from Juliet Phillips of E3G. Juliet, would you like to ask your question? There we go.
Hi, and yeah, just to echo other participants, thanks very much for the informative presentation. I guess my question also kind of picks up on that theme around the concern if we don't have the right level of financial firepower, it won't be possible to get on track for the welcome ambitions which are set out in the strategy. But thinking of some kind of potential avenues here, obviously we've got the new green gilt issuance and the new UK infrastructure bank as well. So we think these present really kind of welcome avenues which we could be increasing the investment available, and I was just wondering what your views were on using those to help scale up action on green homes.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. Green finance, we're doing a number of projects working with financial institutions and others on green gilt issues, green finance, etc. The Chancellor made some interesting announcements in COP today on growing the green finance sector, which we see as key, because of course, given the scale of the challenge that faces us, it's unrealistic to expect that the taxpayer can pick up all of the bill, and we will need some new and innovative green finance, and we will need the financial institutions to work along with us to do that. So yes, we'll fully support that. We do have a number of initiatives in this sector, working with banks, building societies and others to try and get more finance available to householders, landlords, commercial landlords, etc.
Thank you. And whilst the other delegates are thinking of some questions, I just wondered if you might be able to answer one on local authorities, Minister. What support will be available for local authorities to encourage people to install heat pumps when replacing boilers as well as home retrofits?
Well, of course, the ability to install heat pumps is available under things like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Obviously, we have the Home Upgrade Grant, which is targeted towards those in more rural areas or off the gas grid, as well as, of course, that's mainly obviously targeted towards lower income householders, but also, of course, the boiler upgrade scheme, £450 million over 3 years, which is available to everyone who wants to install heat pumps. And as I said, a number of our schemes are targeted to local authorities. We're working closely with them and working through them, particularly on things like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and the local authority delivery element. And hopefully you should have received a letter from me in the last few days outlining the latest Sustainable Warmth grant to, I think I've written to every MP to tell them what was awarded in their own particular areas.
Fabulous, thank you. And so coming now to Philip Fox from the UK Green Building Council. Philip.
Good afternoon. So my question is about embodied carbon, because leading voices across the industry have been calling for regulation of embodied carbon as soon as possible. So I wondered whether the government was considering accelerating the timeline for embodied carbon policy that was mentioned in the net zero strategy.
Yeah, so I didn't catch all of that question, but I think it was about embodied carbon, and I think it's a very good point. We need to look at the supply chain, industrial decarbonisation strategy, of course, looking towards helping steel manufacturers, cement manufacturers, concrete producers, etc., to decarbonise their production and their output. But it's an important point.
Thank you. And can I come to Eleanor Goldberg? Eleanor?
Hiya. I work for Amory Morris MP. Just had a question. In Amory's constituency of Newton Abbot, there's a lot of older properties. What a lot of these properties can't get better insulation. They're not allowed double glazing. They can't put heat pumps in or change the piping. So I just wondered if there is any plans to perhaps change some of those rules or come up with something that will be suitable for these properties.
That's an important point, and I think so you're breaking up. I think the question was about older properties and listed buildings, etc. And of course, you're right. It's difficult for them to change the fabric in a lot of properties for double glazing, external wall insulation, etc. And of course, there will be exemptions built into any regulations to take account of that. Of course, it is possible to install internal pipework and a lot of buildings, depending on building control permissions, etc. And heat pumps work in a similar way to existing gas or oil-fired central heating. Sometimes need bigger heat emitters and obviously outside boxes, but it is possible in some circumstances to install them in older or listed buildings. But you still need to improve some aspects of the insulation to help that. But it's an important point. We are working closely with DLUC, who look after building regulations and the listed building register, to make sure that some options are available. People that live in the relatively few older or listed buildings where upgrading is difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you, and do keep your questions coming in. But moving from the old to the perhaps very new, on hydrogen, how do you envisage the potential rollout of hydrogen for home heating following the 2026 decision date?
Yeah, I mean, hydrogen, I realise that a lot of people are very enthusiastic about hydrogen. It's still an emerging technology. There's potential behind it. I think it's unlikely, to be honest, that we're going to be using hydrogen to replace the totality of natural gas. You'd be talking about producing huge quantities of hydrogen, and then you've got to ask yourself where it comes from. The two ways of producing hydrogen at the moment are electrification of water using green electricity, and of course you then ask yourself what would be the point of producing hydrogen to go into home heating when you can just use electricity directly in most cases through heat pumps to generate home heating. Of course, there's also blue hydrogen produced from natural gas if you get carbon capture, usage and storage. So we do have a hydrogen plan, which was launched in the summer for the production of something like 5 gigawatts of hydrogen, ideally low carbon hydrogen by the end of the decade. And our approach is very much to support hydrogen. We will introduce some kind of similarity to the contracts for difference scheme, some price support to help the generation of hydrogen to kickstart the market. And then we will take a view sometime in the, as I said, in mid-2020s, after we've had a hydrogen village trial. We are already have 2 hydrogen powered houses, demonstration houses in Gateshead and the North, which I have visited. So it does work. It is able to do the work. There are boilers, there are hobs, there are gas fires, etc. And of course, you can inject up to 20% hydrogen into the current gas main without anybody having to change their appliances. So hydrogen has some potential, so it will probably play a role, but it will not be, in my view, completely replacing natural gas system. So we will support the production of it, we will implement our excellent strategy, and we will take a view, depending on how the production of it is rolled out, roughly 2026, in what role it would play and what the balance would be between using hydrogen for, say, heating, for powering industrial plants, for trains, for buses, for HGVs, etc.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to Joe from the APPG.
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, my question is more around the sort of general thought process behind the heating building strategy, and it's just we've seen the switch to EVs, the electrification of cars, basically, and has the kind of that transition with a phase-out date and some money, some grants up front. Has that been the kind of thinking behind what BEIS are doing in the heating building strategy when it comes to switching away from gas boilers towards heat pumps, basically having a long stop end date and then some funding, some grant funding up front? Is that kind of the sort of ballpark we're in?
Yeah, it's similar, albeit, of course, in terms of vehicles, of course, we knew what the answer is in terms of electrifying and battery-powered zero-emission vehicles, etc. In home heating, it's slightly more complicated, and there are a number of different solutions. So we've set the aim, the target for the phase out of new installations of gas boilers from 2035. But before we do that, we want to make sure that alternatives are in place. So the strategy behind supporting the installation of heat pumps through all the different schemes that I've mentioned is to bring the costs down. At the moment, they're expensive, they're slightly technically complicated for people to use and to install, but there are some quite exciting developments in the supply chain. I've been to visit a couple of them myself, and very confident that costs will come down. Octopus in particular have some quite exciting plans to launch heat pump offers next year, prices that they tell me would be on a parity with gas boilers using our new grant, which is great to see. They have huge new training centres being set up in order to help the installation of them, and even in many cases they can actually use still the existing pipework that's in place for gas boilers with radiators as well. But that will obviously depend on the existing property. So there are some exciting plans. The idea is to try and seed corn to the market, to try and to bring the private sector on board, to use their immense research and development, innovation skills, etc. We want to work with the existing gas boiler manufacturers and some kind of market mechanism to encourage them to offer heat pumps as well, and possibly change their production practices to produce heat pumps. A lot of different things we can do, but before we announce an absolute phase out for gas boilers, we need to make sure people have the appropriate alternatives in place that cost no more than the existing gas boilers, offer consumers a similar experience, and don't cost them any more to run.
Thank you. And can I come back
That's
to
a long and complicated answer.
Baroness Young, you had another question.
Yeah, this is a
It's not
niche.
fair. Baroness Young gets the chance to ask me questions in the House as well. She's getting
You know you love it, Martin. You know you love it. This is a niche question, really, though it's quite widespread. We still come up against English Heritage and local authority listed building officers saying that you can't put double glazing into listed properties, and we've really got to overcome that if we're going to get some of these old leaky properties, which are part of our heritage, to go at least somewhere along the zero carbon track. So how about cancelling VAT on energy saving upgrades to listed buildings and beating the shit out of planning officers?
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I mean, it's not for me, because it's not my policy area, but building regulations and listed buildings belongs in a different department. But we are trying to work with DLUC to talk to local planning officers, etc. I've had some difficulties with some of our schemes in terms of installing external wall insulation on some properties, not necessarily listed properties. But I hope that planning officers will take a more open approach. So actually, some of the finishes on external wall insulation are actually really, really good. You cannot tell that this is not original brick, this is not original stone. I went to visit some properties in Durham, County Durham recently, that were old Victorian terraced brick-built houses, and the change that the installation that PWI had made to these houses was incredible. The finishes were identical to that which the original brick provided, and it brightened up the whole of the terrace, improved it massively environmentally, but also improved the appearance of these properties as well. You can also get some really good solutions in terms of replacing old sash windows, for instance. You can get double glazed wooden sash windows now that are properly installed, can look no different to the old original windows. So I think, given a bit of imagination, and as I say, I'm speaking sort of off the cuff here because it's not my policy area, then by planning officers, by the listed building people, we can make some improvements to existing listed buildings, but without destroying their character.
Perhaps you could address Mr. Gove in stern tones.
I'll have a chat with him.
And thank you, Minister. And coming for the first time to Richard Hoxwell Baldwin. There's Richard, there we go.
Hello there. Yes, in relation to the hydrogen strategy, can you give assurances that should carbon capture and storage not reach its projected capture rates, as has happened at numerous sites globally, and I could run off a list of them, but we don't have time, that the blue hydrogen track will not be pursued?
Well, we're going to introduce a low carbon hydrogen standard, and so that to ensure that hydrogen that we do support is on a low carbon track. So the implication of your question would be is that if they can't capture the hydrogen, then it will make it very difficult to meet that low carbon hydrogen standard.
Okay, thank you. That's reassuring.
And we are going back this time to Juliet Phillips from E3G, who had another question.
Thanks. I'm not sure if Joe was in there before me on the list. No. Okay, great. My question was around the running costs of heating, because at the moment it's cheaper to use fossil gas, and in part that's due to the way that fuel bills are structured, with around a quarter of the electricity bill made up of eco levies. So I know there was plans to consult on this, but I wondered where government thinking currently was on how we can make it more affordable and to reward people for using cleaner electricity, as well as parallel measures to protect poor and vulnerable households. I know there's concerns around that.
Sure. I mean, that's a key question. We do need, as I said, we do need to rebalance the differential between gas and electricity. If we're to provide the right incentives for people, but I hope you recognise that given the current spike in gas prices, when people are really struggling to pay their bills, perhaps now is not the right time to start looking at this. It's something that we do need to look at over the years to come. This is a gradual process, but the Treasury are very well aware of the need to balance out the prices to make the price of electricity more attractive for users of fuel than gas. Heat pumps are proportionately more efficient than gas boilers, but traditionally we've had relatively cheap gas in this country for the current gas spikes. Precisely one of the reasons, precisely as you say, that a lot of the costs of decarbonisation of the electricity system, previously around the contracts for difference, the various eco schemes, etc., are piled onto electricity bill payers in order to fund that decarbonisation. And beyond the small green gas support systems that we're just introducing at the moment, there's very little on gas. So in general, yes, we totally get the argument, but got to have a bit of political sensitivity to the current gas price spike.
Thank you. And there's been a rush on this question, so I'll ask it. Has the government looked at how the electrification of home heating combined with electric vehicle uptake might impact demand surges on the electricity grid, and what work is being done on that?
Of course. I mean, there's a lot of projects in place with Ofgem are leading on talking to the network suppliers to make sure that we have, firstly, of course, the appropriate supplies in place, and that's why we are another round of contract for difference to procure another round of offshore and onshore wind electricity, plus other forms of renewable electricity as well. So we're ramping up production on that, but we do need to be aware of the massive spikes that we will get and balance out the electricity supply load. So suppliers are coming forward and offering quite attractive tariffs for people now who are prepared to wait till 3 o'clock in the morning to charge their car or whatever, when more electricity is available and demand is lower. And one of the abilities of course, smart meter rollout, and we now have almost 50% of the country on board with smart meters, will enable more attractive and flexible tariffs to be offered by companies to do precisely that.
Thank you. And there was an interesting question here about the decarbonisation of homes is going to require the installation of millions of heat pumps, but we currently have a green skills crisis. And if we want a just transition, then we need to ensure that all young people and workers are receiving in these intensive industries are receiving the education and training they need to enter the jobs that will make net zero happen. What plans are in the pipeline to ensure we overcome the green skills crisis that we are potentially facing? Yeah,
I again totally agree with the sentiments of that. I mentioned in my introduction about the Green Skills Task Force report. We're working with the DFE to ramp up the training opportunities. I think some of the people on the call, the MCS, etc., has some excellent accredited training courses to, I think we just flashed up a message now to say exactly that, coordinated to help the transition. I think it's a week-long course to help gas engineers and others to transition towards supporting heat pumps. Individual companies, I know Octopus do, I know Dakin do, have some great training centres to help people to retrain as well. So there's a lot going on in the market. This will not happen overnight. It's something that's going to increase gradually over time as the hundreds of thousands of central heating installers and gas engineers, etc., realise that the opportunities in the market are now elsewhere, and they will help to move towards the other greener jobs and installation of alternative forms of heating.
Thank you. Eleanor Goldberg, did you want to come in with your supplementary on the grid?
Sorry, yes, me again. So you talked about making sure there's enough input into the grid to deal with the demand, but I'm no expert, so this could well be a stupid question, but can the grid, the actual infrastructure of the grid, deal with the increase in demand? Is there a chance that the grid could kind of go down because it's never experienced that level of demand, or is it really just a case of ensuring there's the right amount of input?
Well, it's a question of both. It's a question of ensuring that there's the right amount of input, but it's about also ensuring that demand can be smoothed out wherever possible. So, it's a valid question. I actually have a degree in electrical engineering, so it's something I have good technical knowledge of, and it's an immense challenge because effectively we're moving the system at the moment away from kind of large system of large nodes, so large power stations, whether coal or nuclear or gas, producing large amounts of power and then distributing it as a node to lots of other users. So we will have some of those, but we'll have a lot more distributed sources of power as well through offshore, onshore wind farms, through solar panels, etc. So, but the work is going on in order to reconfigure the grid. It's going to be a large task, an important task to make sure that the load is balanced out and that we have enough production to make sure that everybody can get the supply when they want it. There were a number of interconnector cables connecting us to the continent. There are some quite exciting plans in place. We put a new cable into Iceland to take advantage of some of their geothermal power. Massive, incredible engineering tasks are taking place at the moment as we look towards diversifying our supplies. But yes, you're right, it needs to happen. It's a big technical challenge, but the work is ongoing to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're coming to the final question, which I'm going back to Joe from the APPG.
Thanks, Lane, and sorry that you've had to hear from me again. I've got a quick question, more about the politics than anything else, actually. So the heating bill strategy is kind of pushing towards a kind of direction of electric heating through supporting of heat pumps. So has BEIS done any kind of internal research on whether, in the long run, electrification of heating will actually be cheaper for consumers compared with gas or hydrogen, for example? Because there's been a lot of stuff in the media lately about the cost of net zero, for example. So have BEIS done any internal research on this, and what can you tell us about what the costs are going to be like for consumers to heat their homes in the long run if they switch over to electric heating?
That's a good question. I don't think it's fair to say that the heat and building strategy is tilting everybody totally towards electrification of heat. We're carefully keeping our options open. There is no one silver bullet. It would be some silver buckshot. There'll be a number of different solutions. So, electrification, heat pump will clearly play a large role, but we're still keeping our options open in terms of whether hydrogen will play a role. And we haven't said much on this call about the importance of heat networks, or the artist formerly known as district heating, which will play a role certainly in a lot of inner city areas. We have a green heat network fund. Spending several £100 million on some quite exciting schemes from a number of local authorities, for instance, using waste mine water, for instance. There's some exciting schemes up here again in my region, the northeast, in order to do that. It's a whole village in County Durham that is going to be heated using waste mine water. So heat networks will play a role, hydrogen will play a role, heat pumps will play a role, but questioner is quite right. We need to make sure that the cost is balanced out. So in terms of heat networks, for instance, where we're going to introduce powerful regulation to make sure that customers are protected and supported in the transition for that. And of course, in order to make sure that heat pumps electrification is a comparable cost to gas boilers. That's why we need to look in the longer term at rebalancing gas and electricity prices. So there was a lot of work going on to make sure that the switch is fair and equitable for consumers, because if people think that they're going to be facing massively increased bills, then of course it will reduce their support for the change.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been really great to hear directly from you and for answering so many questions. Thank you to the Secretariat, Green Alliance, for all their work with the APPG, and I'm sure there are many other future events that I'm supposed to promote that I don't have on this piece of paper, but they're very good at advertising them. They appear on a WhatsApp group near you very soon. So thank you all very much for coming this afternoon, and thank you so much, Minister, for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Celine.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Martin. Cheers.